Last night, I dreamed of hearts and rot, of men in mirrored wolf's masks, of fat maggots squirming toward the yawning pit filled with roiling water, and of golden people eating bloody meat off jeweled plates as children screamed. I woke with a start. A cool, familiar hand covered my forehead.
What are your dreams about?
Michael asked quietly. Dead sisters, I answered without hesitation, barely understanding what I was saying. And brothers. He soothed me back to sleep, into another nightmare I still don't remember. I only remember waking up at 9:13 in the morning, soaked with sweat, hair so damp it looked like I'd just showered, or maybe taken a swim in the ocean. Michael, of course, was gone. A handwritten note was folded on his pillow that said, I was called to work, I had to go, I'll be back as soon as I can. I reread it, wondering why he didn't just leave a text message. Then I realized I didn't have a phone. On the heels of that galloped another realization. I don't remember going to bed. I remembered standing at the top of the stairs, eavesdropping as Michael and Richard exchanged threats. After that, I only remember Michael gently whispering me awake in the dark. And then it was suddenly morning, and there I was, alone again with nothing but my fractured memories and a mind I couldn't trust. I was afraid. But why? This was good. Hell, this was great. With Michael gone, I could break into his office, leave the house, maybe even find Richard. I couldn't do any of these things if Michael was here. Talk about luck. So why did I hesitate? I showered and dressed myself, then ate as heartily as I could. I learned already that not eating was the worst thing I could do, especially if I planned to leave the house. After eating, I dithered. I checked the entire house, peeked out at the driveway for Michael's car, and briefly panicked when I realized I had no idea what it even looked like. Then I stepped out the back door and scanned the property. There was nothing, which was neither a surprise nor a relief. I went back inside, ignoring a pang as the dry heat gave way to air-conditioned sterility. As soon as the back door clicked shut, the knocking started. Slow and desperate, as if each thud took the very last of a dying person's strength. It echoed down the hall from Michael's office. Somehow, they knew he was gone, and they knew I was awake. Timidly, I tiptoed down the hall and knelt by the door. The heavy wood continued to rattle in its frame, more frantically with every second. I imagined I could see the impact, see the door bulging from the middle in defiance of its physical limitations. I closed my eyes and splayed my hand against the door. The wood gave one last judder and fell still. Without opening my eyes, I asked, "Do you still have memories to show me?" I anticipated the dry hiss of my rotting doppelganger, but what issued forth was worse. Something wet and alive, corrupted, like she'd started to grow back and it had gone terribly, terribly wrong. "What do you want to show me?"
"You have to open the door."
This was a clear, tired voice I recognized, one that inexplicably brought tears to my eyes. The woman in the blue coat.
"We unlocked it inside."
My hand reflexively went to the keypad, which lay beneath 2 padlocks. I can't.
"But you need to let us out."
Her words were shrill and plaintive, and for the first time bore the traces of an accent. "I don't have the code or the keys."
"Look down,"
gurgled my double. I did. Shadows danced in the scant space between the carpet and the door, a sliver no more than half an inch thick. Then fingers emerged, coated in blistered flesh. The crack under the door was too small for them. Blackened curls of skin peeled away from the red skin beneath as it scraped against the wood.
"I promised to protect you,"
the woman said sadly.
"I said I would never hurt you. I don't want to undo everything. But if I'm going to protect you, I have to hurt you this time. I'll only show you what you need to know."
Her fingers were hideously bright against the carpet, puffy and oozing foul yellow fluid. "Do I have to touch you?" I asked, unable to help myself.
"You do."
I closed my eyes again and blindly lay my palms against her burnt fingers. They were too soft and painfully hot to the touch, and then they were merely soft and warm, and then gone. I opened my eyes and found myself staring at a pair of knees. I looked up, and it was her. She looked different, though. Her hair was long, and she no longer wore a blue coat. She also seemed older, somehow. She knelt down, took my hands, and gave me a kind smile. She wasn't beautiful. Her mouth was thin and long, cheekbones low, features unremarkable. but the warmth in her expression made her beautiful to me. She picked me up, and the next thing I knew, I was taller, bigger, and curled on a mattress on a concrete floor. The thin mattress did nothing to mask the dank, bone-numbing chill of the room. Every part of my body hurt. The skin of my face felt raw and swollen. She knelt by my head, gently finger-combing my dirty, sweaty curls. After a while, she stood up and moved on to another mattress. Another numb child curled up in agony. I felt a violent stab of jealousy, but couldn't compel myself to move. Suddenly, I was older again, in a different place and time I recognized. I was following men in mirrored masks down into the pit in the palace. One of 36 filthy children with bony limbs and fevered eyes. Tables lined the pit, as always, set with empty plates that glittered with jewels. I tried to stop the memory, but despite my best efforts, the voice of an insane god screeched down while a man in a wolf mask whispered instructions to me, and then I was attacking the other children, tearing out handfuls of hair and pummeling their faces, jamming fingers into their eyes and smashing their heads against the smooth, round walls of the pit. I thought it was over then, but no. The memory continued into unfamiliar territory. The pit was filled with small, broken bodies I'd made. Only one other child was unscathed, a rangy little boy with dark gold eyes and a dull, matted tangle of black hair. We circled each other wearily. I scanned the arena, trying to plot routes over fallen bodies and slicks of blood. Then someone stepped forward. The man in the wolf mask, the one who'd saved my life, the one who had eyes like Michael's. He picked me up and held me close. Together, we stared down at the black-haired boy, who glanced around painfully, hoping, probably, for someone to pick him up too. Applause rose, vast and deafening like a colossal flock of birds, like waves crashing on a shore in the middle of a storm. I looked up and saw the woman in the blue coat standing at the rim of the pit. I willed her to look at me, but her eyes were fixed on the golden-eyed boy. The wolf man turned and carried me out of the pit. The others followed him in procession, mirror masks flashing white and gold with every step. "You aren't finished," he whispered. "No matter what they do to you, you can't scream or he will win." I knew instinctively who he was, the black-haired boy with the caramel eyes, the one the blonde woman loved more than me. "What are they going to do?" I asked. "Things other people have done before, but worse." The procession filed into a kind of antechamber with nothing but a great sunken bath. The wolfman left me there and exited. The procession followed him out, silent and eerie, undulating like a giant snake. Finally, at the very end of the procession, came the boy. The blonde woman held him by the hand. Another violent flare of jealousy burnt my insides. She bathed us both. Dirty hair came clean, knots brushed out, mats clipped away, dirt and grime slid off my skin in grungy swirls snaking off into the clean water. Outside the room, noise swelled steadily, music and laughter and breathless swells of excitement, all underscored by a heavy, organic rhythm I couldn't understand. It almost sounded like a heart, a giant heart, each beat thrumming through the marble floors. The woman with the golden hair took her time bathing us. She tried to smile occasionally, but her mouth was thinner than ever, and broken somehow, like she was having trouble deciding whether to smile or scream. Sometimes her eyes went flat, like there was nothing in her at all, leaving me with the skin-crawling feeling that an automaton was tending to me. Outside, the laughter grew more savage and the heartbeat sped up. No longer thud, thud, but thud, 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 thud. The woman dried me carefully and in a single deft movement slid a white shift dress over my head. Silky folds fell past my knees with a soft, hushed whisper. She draped an identical one over the black-haired boy. He looked stupid. Maybe the woman made a mistake, or maybe they'd run out of boys' clothes. There'd been a lot more boys than girls in the pit, after all. The woman pulled us both close and held us for a long time. I pressed my ear to her stomach, trying to block out the monstrous heartbeat and the screaming gales of laughter beyond the doors. "Are we going to sleep now?" the boy asked hopefully. The prospect brought a twinge of relief, but I remembered the wolfman's warning. "You aren't finished." "No," I said. The woman drew a sharp breath, then gently disentangled herself. She took each of us by the hand and led us to the doors. The boy squirmed slightly, His eyes were enormous, feverish. "Are you coming with us?" The woman shook her head soundlessly. She stopped at the door, let go of my hand, and rapped 3 times. Outside, the revelry stopped. Eerie silence reigned, broken only by the bone-shaking heart rhythm. The door swung open, revealing chaos. Dirty plates filled the tables, wet-looking bones littered the floor, while people crowded around the pit. They had the essence of being caught, frozen in the middle of a revelry. They stood and sat and kneeled and lay, twisted around to watch us enter. Most of them wore no clothes. I felt the blood drain from my face. In addition to their masks, a few of them wore round, glistening hats with holes like eyes. I tried to get a better look as the blonde woman guided me through the throng, but couldn't make sense of them. They looked broken and wet, almost bloody. The crowd parted for us, wordless and still. The heavy thud continued, growing more intense as we approached the pit. The floor vibrated under my feet with every step, so intense I was afraid I would lose my footing. We stopped at the rim. I gasped. Down below, where the dirty stone floor had been just an hour ago, was a deep bowl of light, a reverse dome. I saw trees with violet leaves shaking violently in a wind I couldn't feel or hear. Silver clouds scudded across a dreamy green sky shot through with churning swirls of blue and yellow. It was from the pit that the great heaving thud issued. I craned my neck, trying to see beyond the edges of the dome. The woman's grip tightened dramatically on my wrist. She knelt. I followed her lead clumsily, still transfixed by the rich, alien landscape just a tumble away. I stole a glance at her and at the black-haired boy. They trained their eyes on the ground, ignorant to the wondrous landscape inches from their faces. Could they not see it? How was that possible? The woman kissed each of us on the top of our heads, then stood up and walked away. As she retreated, the bodies around us shifted, roiling like a wave, and a collective susurration passed over my head. I shot one more look at the dome, then glanced at the boy. He was looking at me with an expression too hard and too afraid for childhood. As I watched, a man came up behind him, so close his toes tingled playfully in the white cloth. A shadow slid across us, a deep tide of anti-light. It was too large for me to comprehend from my position on the floor, but I thought I recognized the shape of a heavy snout and enormous, cruel horns. Then I felt hands on my neck, probing, predatory, violating, and then one more on my chest, my waist, my ankles as the bodies slithered forward, too hot and too damp and far, far too big. I reached down desperately, trying to dive headlong into the dome. My hand plunged in, and suddenly the heartbeat became much more consuming, suddenly painful but liberating. It was a good pain, a whole body pain, a transformative pain, and if I could just get away, just slip inside the dome. But they dragged me back, these cackling, squalling people, shrieking with laughter. But just before my hand left the pit, my fingers convulsed on something slick and fresh and damp, tearing it away, leaving me with a handful from another world, a dream world, one I disappeared into as I suffered yet another horror. It didn't do anything for the pain, but somehow it stopped me from screaming. When they were done, and I was back in the antechamber, bleeding and gasping in pain with every breath, the boy was laid out next to me, breathing wetly. His eyes were dull. Every once in a while, he sobbed softly. I realized he had nothing. No alien world to draw comfort from, nowhere to go while they hurt him, no wolfman to pick him up and hold him high. So I reached out, hissing with pain as my fingertips probed the marble. Something was stuck to my palm, soft and crushed and sticky. When I splayed my hand, I saw a single violet leaf, the last one of the bouquet I'd shredded off the limb. I'd scraped it off with my thumbnail and painstakingly pinched it between my fingers. I held it out to the boy. He stared blankly at me for a long time. His breathing was shallow and increasingly slow, eyes losing what little light they had. Then, without warning, he reached across and plucked it from my fingers. I looked past him and saw a familiar figure standing silently in the corner. The wolfman, fixated on the unearthly leaf. The memory ended with the image of the boy's small hand greedily taking the leaf before seguing into another. I was much taller now, several years older. I somehow felt too heavy and curiously empty at the same time. Something heavy covered my head and weighed down my shoulders. a massive snarling snout protruded from my face, obscuring my vision except for a small, round tunnel. The narrow field of sight was filled by a golden tube, ornately carved with horned animals and inlaid with gemstones. I was dizzy in the dream, unwell and confused, even more so when a spidery pair of hands set a squalling infant before me. I looked across the table, and I saw the blonde woman, watching me with unimaginable pain in her face. Then suddenly that memory ended too, and I fell back with a sharp gasp. Carpet scraped my palms, and my husband's office door stood in front of me. 4 fingers protruded from the crack underneath it, burnt and swollen. As I watched, they retreated, leaving more scraps of ruined flesh behind on the carpet. Who was that boy? I realized I was shaking, painful, full-body shudders, almost convulsions.
Thomas,
she answered. I leaned my head against the door, squeezing my eyes shut. Who are you?
Christine.
So low, so soft and sad. Who's with you? The girl who looks like me, who is she?
My sister.
God damn it.
Can you open the door?
She rattled the knob weakly.
Please, Rachel, let us out before the bull comes back for her heart.
And sure enough, I heard the thud of that corrupted heart beating away. No longer far away in a castle, no longer buried in a pit, but here, 10 feet away, spraying rot all over the 2 creatures on the other side of the door. Creatures that, if Michael was to be believed, I was responsible for. But could I believe him? Could I actually trust him? I didn't think so, but I also didn't know what else to do. Richard was an unknown quantity. Whatever their disagreement, he and Michael agreed that he was some kind of traitor. Thomas was now a homeless, unstable prostitute who'd hit me rather than speak with me. The women in the room weren't figments of my imagination, nor was that heart. Michael clearly saw it, even going so far as to crush the maggots that crawled out of it. And the pit in my backyard that led down to a wild ocean under the green sky, the same green sky I'd seen in the arena. He'd shown it to me of his own volition. But where else did Michael fit into this? Was he the Wolfman from my memories? He had to be. His eyes were too distinctive and rare. Even though his voice was much, much different, so much softer and younger, he was so familiar, even decades ago. And he'd never answered me when it came to my dead doppelganger or her gentle sister. He'd never told me why he killed her, or even that he had. But you got out before. I saw you. You were in the woods, in the restaurant. You walked with me to the shop. They conversed quietly, Christine's soft whispers mingling with her sister's raspy gurgles. Finally, Christine told me,
We've been trapped here since Michael pulled you out of the water.
You were in here before he took me there, to the pit in the backyard, the rough mock-up of the arena in the palace.
No, we weren't.
I squeezed my eyes shut. How did this keep getting worse and worse? Every second it became more horrifying and more absurd. I was in that room with you yesterday. He took me to the water last night.
No.
The woman who looked like me rasped harshly.
He's trapped us here for weeks.
Here,
Christine said kindly. She wriggled her ruined hands back under the door.
let me show you.
No,
said my doppelganger. It was hard to tell, but she sounded furious, enraged.
it isn't enough.
No, but it's important. Rachel, promise you'll remember it, even when you learn everything else.
I stared down at her blistered, puffy hands, feeling inexpressibly ill. What do you mean by everything else? Christine curled her fingers slightly. A blister puffed, pus cascaded over her palm.
This first.
I swallowed hard and touched my fingertips to hers. A brief moment of darkness followed by light flooding past my half-closed lids. It had an eerie quality, a familiar green-gray tinge. Clammy air enveloped me, heavy and cold and wet. Surf crashed along a nearby shore, not quite loud enough to drown out the sound of a man crying. My body jostled weirdly. I tried to move, tried to open my eyes, but I couldn't. All I could see was a silver sky and overhead. The jostling had a rhythm, which I quickly figured out. Footsteps. Someone was carrying me, and that someone was weeping. After several minutes, the man waded into the sea. Flashes of brilliant light, too bright and rich for my eyes to fully register, flickered at the edges of my vision. My hands and feet were soon submerged. Wet tendrils of hair clung to my face. It itched terribly, and I was so cold. It went beyond feeling like I would ever be warm again. I couldn't remember what it meant to be warm in the first place. Water lapped across me and then quickly covered me. The weeping man brushed wet hair away from my face and leaned over, resting his forehead against mine. His hands trailed down my face and bare shoulders, gently stroking my skin. I felt the pressure from his touch, but nothing else. I tried to speak, but couldn't move my tongue or mouth. When he drew back, I realized it was Michael. I could barely see through the slit in my eyelids. His face was puffy with tears and badly bruised. Half-healed wounds snaked down his throat, disappearing past the collar of his shirt. He caressed my face one last time and retreated, leaving me to drift on the waves. I floated for what seemed a long time. Then suddenly, there was something heavy, combined pressure and pull on my chest. I started to sink. I tried to turn my eyes, but they wouldn't move. It was all right, though. As I watched, something rose my chest, filling my vision. The blonde woman, Christine, covered in horrific burns and staring down at me with frantic worry. She slid into the water and started pulling me toward the shore. Water lapped around my face and filled my ears, deafening me to everything but the deep vibrations of the water. After a moment, there came more pressure, heavy and crushing, pushing me under the waves. Water filled my mouth and I choked. I could move again. I immediately flailed, kicking Christine and propelling myself as a second body crawled out of my chest. The tide pulled me away from the shore, carrying me toward the horizon. Michael's frantic screams carried over the water, but already sounded distant. Christine swam after me. I wondered how badly her burns hurt, submerged in the seawater. Then I wondered why I was running away from her, because she had never hurt me. She'd only helped me, up to the end of her life when some part of me had done something unforgivable. My consciousness glanced across the memory, but ricocheted away, unable to dwell on it and unwilling to remember. Far away, Michael continued to scream. Seawater splashed against my face, making it hard to see, but I caught a glimpse as he rushed back into the water, chasing me even as the tide bore me away. Something circled my wrists, soft and hard at the same time. Cold iron coated in bloated flesh. The smell overwhelmed me, sweetly corrupted and thick as mucus. It pulled me under the waves and away from the open sea, drowning me even as it carried me to shore. At least I couldn't smell it underwater. That alone made dying worth it. I was drowning, dying, almost dead, and then I suddenly felt the sea floor, sand scraping my knees and then my arms and my chest and thighs. And finally, I was on the shore, gasping and coughing up geysers of glimmering black water. Michael skidded to his knees and pumped my chest. I choked and coughed and tried to scream, but it hurt too badly. Everything from the guts to mouth felt raw, scorched, every drop of water and every hitch of breath in all-consuming agony. Michael tipped me onto my side as I vomited seawater and viscous, foul slime. Then he pulled me up into a clumsy hug, sobbing into my wet hair as Christine and her dead sister looked on with unreadable faces. Again, it went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my hallway, leaning against Michael's office door.
Do you see now?
Christine asked.
We came from the water. Then he brought us back and locked us away.
I ran my fingers through my hair, half expecting it to be wet. What about the bull?
She was already out.
I tried to understand this, but couldn't. Even with all this new information, I didn't know what she meant and didn't want to. Did he take me there to resurrect me?
Yes,
Christine said, sounding relieved.
After he killed you.
My doppelganger added. Everything seemed to stop, including my heart.
Don't do this to her,
Christine moaned. A second set of fingers wormed beneath the door, bloated and wet. Myriad shades of bruised purple and moldy gleam, but flat fish-belly white. Do you want to see? Michael's face filled my mind's eye, broken and battered as he wept over me. Did I want to see? Did I really want to see? Did it matter? Before I could convince myself otherwise, I reached for the dead hand. Dead flesh squelched under my hand, eliciting a bone-deep shudder. Suddenly, I was in a room, round and white, brightly lit, with the same sterile quality of a doctor's office. I was chained to an unassuming tile floor. A pair of polished boots stood before me, and behind that stood 4 standard office chairs that looked both surreal and laughable. Every part of me hurt, but the pain felt distant, like it was barely my own. I looked up and saw Michael's face staring down at me, impervious, emotionless.
What
He asked silkily.
are you hoping to accomplish?
He had a gun in his right hand, a slim 2-long pistol I could barely identify. "You've been breaking us for a long time." My voice surprised me, as did my eloquence. "Shattering us like mirrors and throwing us away into a proverbial bottomless pit. Except every pit has a bottom, and all our pieces are piling up. You're making a mountain, and it's too late to stop." An old man spoke from one of the office chairs.
Even in metaphor, a mountain of broken glass is hardly frightening, especially when buried.
"It's not buried. It's in a pit that's been becoming too small for it. You've broken too many of us, made a mountain too high to hide, and for the first time, that mountain is going to touch sunlight. Do you know what happens when light touches a mirror?" Maybe it was my imagination, but the atmosphere went from one of contemptuous relaxation to unease.
Please, you're only broken kittens.
Said the old man, finally. "Your broken kittens are evolving into lions, and you're too stupid to see it."
Did you know any of this, Michael?
The man asked stiffly.
No.
He said calmly.
Forgive my doubt, dear boy, but how am I to believe you?
"He didn't know," I interjected. "I didn't tell him anything because he's one of you." Michael's impassive expression twisted briefly. I didn't say this to save him. I did it because either way, they were going to let him live. They had to. But if they believed me, they wouldn't change him, which meant he would remember the venom spilling from my mouth until he finally died. I fixed Michael with a miserable stare, trying to fight back tears. He looked back with a broken expression. My throat felt thick. I drew a ragged breath. "I hate..." One deafening shot, an incredible pressure, the unsettling sensation of open air prickling my freshly exposed brain, and then darkness. Then I was back in my hallway, curled on my side, hands still entwined in my doppelganger's dead fingers.
That happened before.
Christine wailed.
He brought you back afterward, Rachel. Remember, he brought you back.
You're his idol,
Said my double. She squeezed my hand, perhaps trying to comfort me.
but all men turn against their gods.
She continued to stroke my hand. Goose flesh rippled across my skin with every stroke, but I couldn't gather the strength to move. "Where do I go?" I finally asked. "What do I do?"
Find Thomas,
Said my double.
after you let us out.
I want to let them out, I really do, but the prospect of facing more memories, more revelations, more and more and more about the past I'm increasingly thankful to have forgotten, is paralytic. So is the idea of facing them, of seeing Christine's ruined body in all this burnt, blistered glory, of standing before the wet, glistening rot that wore my face and spoke in a voice like mine. I think I could break down the door if I had to. It's thick and heavy, made of solid oak, but I could chip and bang away at it, or at the walls. But Michael has an alarm attached to the door, and even if I got them out, I have no idea how I would travel with these women, these ruined, broken things I somehow brought back from another world. I can't bring them with me, but I can't leave them here. Likewise, I don't think I can stay here, but I have nowhere to go. I still have no idea who I am. I don't know what to do. I sat in the hall for a long while, watching shadows overtake the house as the dead women stroked my hands. But it was hard to ignore the blisters on Christine's fingers and the squelchy rot of my doppelgangers. But I felt it was my duty to let them touch me. Somehow, I knew they drew comfort from me. But it finally grew intolerable, so I pulled away and stood up. My doppelganger instantly started screaming, and Christine began to cry. Leaving the hall was almost physically impossible. Each step took monumental effort, and the hall seemed to stretch before me, expanding half a step for each one I took. Upon exiting the hall, however, their voices ceased, and a weight I hadn't even noticed evaporated. Once upstairs, I felt lighter, safer, and clearer, Without them whispering in my ear, I could make plans. Unfortunately, I had nothing with which to make plans. I had no phone or car, and the city was 4 hours away on foot. I just about resigned myself to walking when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I rushed to the window, and sure enough, it was Michael. Even from 2 stories up, his body language telegraphed anger and misery. As I watched, he slammed the car door and stalked to the house.
Rachel?
Cool and impersonal, painfully sharp.
Rachel!
I wondered how much he knew, if a security camera had caught me talking to the dead women. Since there was no denying it in any case, I went to the bedroom door. Yes? He came upstairs.
Please get ready. We're meeting colleagues.
The only hint of emotion in his sentence.
For dinner shortly.
It was so mundane I wanted to laugh. This was what he was angry about? What?
Dinner.
He repeated coldly.
With colleagues at 8. Get ready.
Your colleagues?
Last I checked, you have none, so yes? Mine.
He rummaged through the closet, then pulled out a red dress and tossed it onto the bed.
Wear that.
I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to make sense of this new, cold persona. I don't want to go.
It isn't up for discussion.
What the hell do you— He whirled around with such ferocity I skittered away. His expression was cold and angry, but his eyes were frantic. Despite everything, I was relieved. Whatever was wrong with him had nothing to do with me.
Rachel, please get ready.
I reached meekly for the dress, looking contrite. He stepped forward and gently circled my wrists with his hands. Calmness overtook me. For the first time in many days, I felt relaxed.
This is very important,
he said.
Just do as I say and follow my lead, as you always do.
He took his hands away. I reached for him absently, fingers brushing his chest. He finally smiled and twisted a lock of my hair around his finger. I could have collapsed for relief.
Don't worry. We'll have a good time.
The assurance buoyed me. I believed him utterly and wanted to keep him happy. Nothing seemed important by comparison. Not the dead woman, not my past, not a mysterious alternate universe or my dire suspicions about my husband. I was happy, I was safe, I was in love, and we were going out to dinner. Deep in my bones, I knew this wasn't right, but every time anxiety gained a foothold, I'd look to Michael for reassurance, and he would smile, and I would feel elation and relief in equal measure. The drive to dinner was uneventful. I didn't feel the need to speak. Why bother, when I felt so happy, so beautifully content, and he was clearly preoccupied. Every once in a while, I'd feel a surge of unease. Whenever that discomfort reared its head, Michael reached for my hand, and all was well again. The restaurant was small and intimate, lit with dim golden lamps and candlelight. Vines crawled up the walls. An impeccably dressed woman led us upstairs. As we passed through, several patrons nodded respectfully. Some even craned their necks as we passed. Michael and I took our seats at a cozy table. To my surprise, Richard was there, as well as a woman about Michael's age, 2 middle-aged men who appeared to be twins, and an elderly man with wide, glassy eyes. When Richard saw me, his face broke into a wicked little smile.
We meet again.
A sense of disquiet reared up, but Michael's hand was suddenly on mine, and buoyant happiness settled over me again. I didn't speak much. There was no point. Richard cracked a few jokes and lavished attention on me, which was mildly uncomfortable, but sort of funny to me. Such a young man trying to make a move on me in front of my husband, his boss, no less. The woman and the twins largely ignored Richard and made polite conversation. The old man, however, remained silent as we drank and ate. He stared at Richard most of the evening, but occasionally would glance at me. His eyes were wide, wet, and swollen, as if he'd been crying recently. Overwhelming sympathy flooded me. How terrible that this poor man couldn't enjoy such a wonderful dinner. I deliberately offered encouraging smiles and tried several times to engage him in conversation, but failed. It finally occurred to me that he was probably deaf or mute, maybe both. Annoyingly, Richard interrupted me whenever I tried to speak with the old man. He constantly reached for my hands and leaned across the table in a manner that was far too intimate, and thus incredibly troubling. I wanted to address it, wanted to chastise him, but whenever the words rose to my lips, I felt Michael's fingers tracing gentle circles in my palm. Conversation progressed. I paid no attention. I felt too sorry for the old man. He looked vaguely familiar, but I simply couldn't place him. His behavior confused and saddened me. His eyes kept widening and flicking between Richard and I. Finally, I realized Richard was saying my name, and apparently had been for a long while.
Rachel,
He repeated.
Rachel!
I frowned, then smiled quizzically. I'm sorry, I missed that.
I want to show you the view from the top. They have a balcony here, and the view is truly phenomenal.
He looked quite beautiful in the dim light, almost angelic, but I didn't want to go with him. I wanted to stay with Michael and the sad old man. I looked at my husband, intending to voice my reluctance, but he squeezed my hand and gently said,
Go on, it's lovely.
I didn't like it, but that was that. I stood up. Richard led me to a flight of stairs. Unable to help myself, I glanced back over my shoulder. Michael was staring after us, fixated and unreadable. I gave him a nervous smile that he didn't return. Richard took us up the stairs and down a hall, past the doors in several conference rooms. Cold air washed over me the moment we exited onto the roof. I looked out eagerly, expecting a stunning view, but was disappointed. There was nothing remarkable about it. Richard casually twisted his fingers into mine and pulled me to the edge with a wide, assured smile. The moment our hands touched, my head exploded into a pounding, crippling pain that literally doubled me over. I was vaguely aware that Richard had dropped to his haunches and put his arms around me, but that made it worse. Whenever he touched me, a jagged bolt of pain ripped through my skull. I'm sorry, I whispered. Give me just a second. The moment I pulled away, pain abated. I beelined for the door. At the threshold, I looked back at Richard, who was white-faced and clearly furious. Disconcerted but not yet angry, I hurried inside. Warmth and dim golden light welcomed me. Excitement and anticipation returned. I'd be back with Michael soon, any moment now. And then, suddenly one of the conference room doors opened and a withered hand reached out. I took it reflexively, and in response, it tugged insistently. Without a thought, I obeyed and entered the room. It was the old man. His large, wet eyes looked impossibly bright in the light streaming through the window. Sympathy flooded me again. I wanted nothing more than to punish whoever had hurt him. He tried to speak, but tremors shook him, breaking up his words before they left his mouth. Finally, he said, Rachel. The door opened. I turned guiltily, expecting Richard, but it was Michael. My face broke into a wide smile, and he reciprocated this time.
What are you two doing in here?
He asked gently. I think the gentleman here got lost, I confessed.
Let's all go back together then.
Michael returned us to the table. Giddy contentment subsumed me again. The rest of the meal passed in a happy golden blur. The only sour note was Richard. He watched me hungrily, the entire time with an expression I hated. I ignored him, instead lavishing attention on Michael and the old man. Toward the end, the old man smiled and reached for my hand. I took his eagerly, his fingers instantly twisted. I tried to let go, but he squeezed back insistently. His fingers wriggled again, then clumsily deposited a slip of paper into my palm. Michael suddenly spoke.
Richard, can you come with me for a moment? I have paperwork for you. I don't know that it'll wait till Monday.
Richard gave me one more burning look, then exited with Michael. The old man tapped my hand urgently. Of course, I remembered, the paper. I gave him a genial smile, then opened my palm. It was a note that said, I'm sorry, I will forget, but please help me again. Below was a phone number alongside the words, Call for John. It was sad, but so sweet. He must have dementia. Even so, looking at the note caused an odd, urgent twinge, a compulsion. I excused myself and went to the restroom, where I promptly slid the note into my bra. On my way back, Richard sidled up beside me, and before I could stop him, gently pressed me back against the wall.
We're going to see each other soon.
He said.
Permanently, I hope.
He swept a sheaf of hair away from my face, studying me intently.
We're almost done.
His touch, his hungry, shameless eyes, his terrible behavior finally broke my reverie. I ducked away, breathlessly angry, and opened my mouth to yell. But then there were hands on my shoulder, strong and familiar, and a sense of calm washed over me again.
Are you all right?
Michael asked quietly. I want to go, I said.
Then we will.
Michael excused us graciously, with smiles and handshakes and apologies all around, including to the old man. Even in my strange, dreamy state, the terror on the old man's face made me incredibly sad. Only when we were on our way home did the utter bizarreness of the evening hit me. What was wrong with Richard? Michael absently reached for my hand. No, I withdrew. Don't do that. Why was he acting that way? Against my will, I felt my mood leveling, felt that deceptive happiness overtake me.
Shh.
Michael soothed.
Don't worry, it's all right. If it comes up again, just give him what he wants.
Thomas's face, imperious and impersonally contemptuous, flitted through my mind. He'd said that too, those exact words, but about Michael. It took all my strength to hold on to that profound anxiety, to not let the quiet euphoria draw it away. I kept thinking of the old man's note and the phone number. As we crawled through the crowded streets, I caught a glimpse of a payphone, right in front of a gas station, like all good American payphones. "Michael," I said, "can you pull over? I need a restroom." He shrugged helplessly.
Do you see anywhere to pull over?
Okay, I opened the door. "Don't worry, I'll be right back." I dashed down the street, drawing a few stairs. Michael shouted after me. I intentionally ran in the opposite direction, then cut across an alley and came up behind the gas station. I peered around the side. Michael's car was nowhere to be seen. He'd clearly been forced along with traffic. I darted to the payphone, dug the slip of paper out of my dress, and dialed collect. I held my breath. On the 7th ring, someone answered. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter. I'm calling for John." Low, slick laughter. "You sure? He's hard to catch, and not all that talented anymore. We've got better." "I'm positive." "The usual or the special?" "Both," I said nonsensically. "That's dangerous." "I'll be fine." "Suit yourself. Where do we pick you up?" I glanced around frantically. Still no sign of Michael, but if he'd gone around the block, I had seconds left. "How about you drop him off?" "Really?" "Yes." I gave them directions to the corner by our house. Rocks and a copse of trees were set back from the road there, offering some privacy. "That's an unorthodox location." "I want him there tomorrow." "When?" Oh God, what if Michael didn't go into work tomorrow? 1 p.m. "How long?" "An hour." "You're brave. It'll be 500. We'll wait for 5 minutes. If you aren't there, we're leaving. No exceptions." Michael's car nosed around the corner. "Got it. Bye." I hung up and dashed to the gas station, pushing past a line of irritable people to get into the bathroom, where I crumpled the paper and flushed it down the toilet. Then I washed up, blotting the sweat off my face, and exited. Michael was waiting by the door. He grabbed me by the wrist and dragged me out.
What are you doing?
He demanded.
You ran into traffic. How stupid can you be?
I tried to answer, but it all overwhelmed me. Fear, confusion, revulsion, anxiety, and I burst into tears. Seized with a stroke of inspiration, I said, "It's Richard. I couldn't. It felt wrong, and you just told me to give him what he..." Michael's face softened, and he drew me close.
That isn't what I meant. I'm sorry. It was a poor choice of words.
He kissed my forehead.
Let's go home.
We got home and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. In the morning, he went to work. I pulled the remaining cash from my computer bag and sat down to wait. At 12:15, I walked to the rendezvous point. I arrived early, so I went to sit on the boulders in the trees and waited while the wind rattled the leaves and kicked up dust. A few minutes later, a nondescript car pulled onto the median. I stood and went to meet it. The back door opened and Thomas tumbled out, blinking in the bright light. He had a dreamy smile that evaporated when he saw me. He tried to climb back inside, but the driver got out, grabbed him, and dragged him to me. Thomas watched me with wide, hopeless eyes as I handed the driver his money. I pointed to the trees. "Take him there." Thomas heaved a sob as he was marched over. I followed behind, feeling inexpressibly guilty. 1 hour, they told me, and left. Thomas watched them go, trembling and clearly aching to run after them. Once they were no longer in sight, I held my arms out in a conciliatory gesture. Thomas reared back, tears flooding his eyes. "Calm down. I don't want to hurt you. It's Rachel. I know you remember me. I'm Rachel." He shook his head. A weird, creepy smile spread over his face.
They killed Rachel. You're what's left. You're Gabrielle.
"I'm definitely Rachel. They killed me, then Michael took me to the sea." Thomas finally stilled. "Do you know what that means?"
He brought you back,
he said slowly. I shrugged nervously. "I guess. I don't remember much of anything, Thomas." He nodded.
That's the sea. Yes, that's what happens.
His face twisted and tears spilled down his face.
That's why you forgot to save me.
He turned to look at me. His face was thin and haggard, fine bone structure nearly obliterated by pain and abuse and endless sun. But his eyes were the same, bright golden caramel, arresting as the day I first met him.
You forgot me, forgot your promise, forgot you loved me.
He dissolved into sobs. I fought a lump in my throat and leaned down, intending to hug him, but he shoved me away.
I knew you would,
he said.
You had the hierarchy on your side. You were the strong one, so you belong to the bull, which makes you safe. You cross the sea whenever you want to. I only cross when I'm hurting, so they hurt me. They hurt me and all the rest of us and used our pain to give sacrifice to open up the other worlds. But it was okay. I hated you sometimes because I'm weak. Because you promised to be there, and you were.
His face darkened and clouded, hatred mingling with the suffering.
Until him, the Bluebeard.
Why do you call him that? I asked sharply, but he'd already devolved into another rant.
It's because of him. You didn't know any better. It's okay, I understand. You couldn't help it, but it's his fault. He broke you down. He made Gabrielle, made you into the bull. He hates me. He made you believe what he wants you to believe, made you see what he wants you to see, because all the world's a stage.
Shivers rolled down my spine, convulsive and almost painful. Why do you call him that? Why are you calling him a Bluebeard? Thomas looked at me strangely.
Not Bluebeard, Rachel. Bluebird. He's a bluebird. They control our minds. Don't you remember?
He looked away, distant and dreamy and so obviously frightened.
Did you protect Richard?
What about Richard? His face contorted into a rictus of panic defeat.
Oh no.
He moaned.
Oh no.
Thomas, look at me. Just look at me. What about Rich?
Don't ask about him anymore. This is all his fault.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have one more question though, and then you can go back. He kept shaking his head. Did you report me as missing?
Yes, I was worried. You were gone, and so was the baby.
He looked up at me, golden eyes swollen and shimmering with tears.
What happened to the baby?
What baby? His earnest hope dissipated before my eyes, leaving brokenness in its wake. Panic surged through me. Thomas, what baby? He began to wail. The driver ran over, breaking through the trees, and gave me a terrible look. Half like I was a slug, half like I was a god. They shuffled over and set their hands on Thomas's heaving shoulders. I'm sorry, ma'am. He's just not up for you anymore. Can't keep up. We'd have told you if we'd known it was you. Here. They fished through their pockets and pulled out $200 bills. Partial refund. I recoiled. No, just give it to him. Thomas shook his head.
We all make sacrifices, Rachel. Remember, we all make sacrifices.
Wait, Thomas. I took the bill and scribbled my address on it. Here, if you ever need anything. He swatted the bill away and started screaming as the driver chuckled to themselves.
No, I know where they took you. They aren't taking me too. You can't make me. You can't fucking make me.
The driver wrapped both arms around Thomas's narrow chest and hauled him away. I stood numbly. The door slammed, cutting off Thomas's shrieks, and the car started to rumble away. After a while, I walked home. When I got inside, a calm, silky voice said,
Visiting prostitutes now, are we?
I screamed and whirled around. Michael sat on the sofa, waiting for me. I grabbed the doorknob, but he said,
Don't leave.
I won't, I whispered. Michael regarded me for a long while, almost impossibly still.
He isn't the man you remember.
Nothing is what I remember. He watched me carefully, eyes glittering strangely. They looked green this afternoon, perfectly green, no trace of blue in either eye. How did you know?
How did I know what?
Rage reared up, but it was swiftly overtaken by hopeless guilt. That I went to see him.
I know everything, Rachel.
How? He didn't respond right away. The longer he stared, the weaker I felt, physically and emotionally, and tired. So tired. My knees were rubbery, the muscles in my thighs incredibly sore. The couch looked soft and inviting, but he was sitting on it. Still, if I sat, I'd be able to rest, to gather my thoughts. But he's there. I needed to stay away, needed to keep my distance. I was tired, though. So catastrophically tired. I shuffled to the sofa and settled down beside him. My head dropped back, sinking into the cushions. It was as soft as I'd imagined, incredibly comfortable and relaxing, and then it wasn't. I blinked, then shot up and scurried to the other end of the room. I must have crossed some invisible threshold because the dead women suddenly started moaning from the office.
Get away from there.
Michael beckoned tiredly.
They wake up when you get too close.
I don't give a shit about them. What did you do to me? That's what you did to me when Richard was... My voice caught in my throat. I felt like I was being strangled. What are you? Emotion flickered across his otherwise inscrutable expression, too quickly for me to identify.
I'm a bluebird.
I waited, afraid to speak. If I said the wrong thing, surely he'd cloud my mind up again. So I waited, even though it was hard. The flatness in his face frightened me, along with the preternatural shine in his eyes. It was too much, and I finally gave in. What does that mean?
It means I can influence your thoughts and actions.
God help me. I laughed. He watched patiently, with the lazy, relaxed concentration of a cat. When I finished, he said,
I can make you see things that aren't there and not see things that are. And I can make you hurt, or I can make you happy. If necessary, and with a great deal of effort, I can make you move even if you resist. That's why we are paired. I set the stage and you perform.
The voices of Thomas and my doppelganger are merged. All the world's a stage. You only see what he wants you to see. For who? I leaned back, settling against the cushions.
You don't want to know.
Bullshit!
No,
he said evenly.
Rachel, I see and sense every part of you. Right now, at this time, I know for a fact that you do not actually want to know this answer.
He rubbed his mouth absently. The small indication of anxiety made me feel a little calmer. How did you know I saw Thomas? You knew before I came in. He drummed his fingers along the back of the sofa.
If I focus and if you are open, I can see where you are. Get an idea of what you are doing and who you are with. Now listen.
Like I had a choice.
I can influence you, sometimes to the point of absolute control. I can see you, I can sense your feelings, but I cannot hear you.
That flicker of emotion again. Relief with... what? Triumph?
Do you understand?
I nodded, even though I didn't. He leaned back.
What did Thomas tell you?
You want me to just give you the only information you don't know?
No, I want to help you, but you are making it extremely difficult and you are approaching the end of the line with people who matter. What did Thomas tell you?
Whatever it means, that I'm consecrated to the bull.
Your body, not you. We made sure of that.
What's the difference? He was impassive again, a bright-eyed sphinx in the waning light.
You were taken as a child and subjected to all manner of horrors. This was intentional. It was meant to break you apart. It worked. Like many broken victims, you compartmentalized, to the point you effectively became two distinct people.
My head swam. Split personality?
Dissociation to preserve your well-being and what I guess you'd call your spirit. It ensured that you remained yourself. The other...
The hesitation in his voice, the utter hateful darkness made my heart seize. Images of a golden bull swept my mind's eye.
It was a joint creation between you and our owners.
His eyes finally dimmed.
And me.
I don't understand.
When children are broken, they have 4 potential pathways. You were marked for the worst of these.
That golden palace, that filthy arena filled with children. A young boy surrounded by naked men, weeping as a horned shadow blotted the lights.
But you, not your other, defied expectations and made it very clear, very quickly, that you are something else.
Yes, something else. Portals and violet leaves, hallucinatory skies and black oceans churning with incomprehensible gods.
This quality saved your life. Other discoveries followed, each one making you more and more valuable, until it was obvious you were an important asset in their arsenal.
Why am I important?
The water in that place, in the sea, it heals everything. Only you can carry it out. I try, but it evaporates the moment I return.
I thought of the arena, of poor Thomas plucking that feathery violet leaf from my fingers. They didn't know that then, though.
No, at first they kept you simply because you were amusingly mercenary, and then curiously hardy. They expected you to die. I expected you to die. Do you know why you're alive? Do you remember?
The leaf, I answered. It saved Thomas too, didn't it? Numbness settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I wondered if the numbness was mine or Michael's. Maybe in his way, he was trying to protect me. It healed us after what they did. He nodded.
No one knew why you were alive. You two were the first to last until... Ugh.
He shuddered involuntarily, another sign of weakness. Real or manufactured to garner my sympathy.
Cetacean.
What were they doing to us? The words were so blunt, it was almost comical.
It was a ritual sacrifice. They put all of you in a pit until one of you kills the rest. Usually the solution only occurs to a single child, sometimes to none at all, but you and Thomas came to the same conclusion.
No, I thought. Thomas only came to the conclusion after watching me.
I know.
Michael said, startling me badly.
But I could see you were attached to him, so I lied for you.
Then what happened, after we survived?
You compartmentalized even further, funneling every part, every feeling, every impulse, every memory of the creature they created into a separate entity, an other. Had I been myself, I'd have stopped you, but I wasn't myself any more than you were.
Gooseflesh rippled across my flesh, feeling like bugs, worms burrowing through my skin into my heart. Why would you have been able to stop that process?
Because I trained you, or rather, my other trained your other.
Rage and terror descended on me. Images, memories threatened to surface. Horrifying things that I'd forgotten for a reason, that the sea had drawn out because they were living wounds.
It's far worse,
Michael said,
than what you were thinking. Try not to remember.
He slid off the sofa and approached. I backed away immediately.
There's no point in remembering. Those people wear our bodies, but they aren't us. We hid them, separated our true selves from them for a reason.
Unbidden, I thought of my doppelganger, rotten yet alive, burning with fury and helpless, hopeless hate. He's one of you, she said. I hate you. Michael reared back as if burned. All composure broke, leaving him trembling and teary-eyed. Fresh bruises I hadn't noticed snaked up from his collar. With a miserable burst of clarity, I realized his composure hadn't broken. He didn't have any composure at all. He'd been manipulating my senses, making me perceive an assured serenity that didn't exist. In spite of everything, that broke my heart.
I took you to the sea as soon as I could.
His voice trembled.
They wouldn't let me take you immediately, but they thought the bull would...
His shoulders heaved, and he drew a deep breath.
I convinced them otherwise. I don't know how. I think they were simply desperate. For centuries, they've been doing what it is they do, and in a matter of years, your ways did more for them than millennia of their old ways. So I got my way, and I brought you back.
He reached for me. I wanted to give in, wanted to hold him and be held, but I had another question. Thomas said he reported me missing. He asked about my baby.
They took the child before I...
He broke off, blinking tears away. Nausea rolled over me like a tide, along with the dangerous, suffocating fuzziness. Before you killed me. I sifted through my memories for any hint of an infant, but found nothing. What happened to it?
They took it,
he repeated. And then?
I don't know.
How can you not know?
I don't...
He broke off.
It's the way it is, Rachel. It wasn't even our first.
I thought back to the paperwork, the records that became blank paper the moment Michael touched me. Strange serrations filled the air, increasingly frantic. Whispers, and they were, I finally realized, coming from me. No. We have to go to the police. Michael, we have to.
The police? How did that turn out for you last time?
The sergeant's laughing face flickered through my mind. Forget the police, the sheriff, the state, the goddamn feds, fucking Interpol.
What do you think we're dealing with, Rachel? Do you really believe this kind of corruption starts at the lowest level? It starts high with people who can pay for complicity and silence. The higher you go, the worse it gets. You lost this battle thousands of years before you were born.
Shut up! I screamed. Everyone, everywhere, is not corrupt.
You're right,
he said. I was so shocked I looked up. Then what's stopping you? What's stopping us? He gave me a dark, almost smug look.
There are repercussions for spewing what will sound like utter nonsense to a society specifically conditioned to disbelieve anything that isn't mundane. You'll be branded a lunatic, a pariah, a fool. Then you'll be killed, or you'll be broken down into nothing and left to rot like Thomas.
He suddenly surged forward. I retreated again, smacking into the wall as he smashed both hands down on either side of my head.
But it gets even better. Even if someone believes you, even if you bring incontrovertible proof at the exact right time to the exact right people, they have one last defense, Rachel. One last ace in the goddamn hole. I can't wait for you to remember anymore. I don't actually believe you'll allow yourself to remember, which is why we have those...
He pointed toward the hallway, to the office where the dead woman lay.
Squalling every time you pass. If they don't jog your memory, nothing will. So it's time.
He pushed himself off the wall and disappeared into his office. Outside, the sun fell beyond the canyon. Shadows lengthened and the room abruptly darkened. Michael emerged carrying an unmarked jewel case.
Sit.
He put the disc in it to play and left me alone to watch it. It started with darkness. Flame flickered into being, a candle, then 10, then 100, lighting in a spiraled away, seeming to float on a sea of darkness. It was beautiful, mesmerizing. Then part of the floor burst into flame, a ring around a familiar pit. The fire illuminated dozens of people in robes and animal masks, arranged into a shape that looked deliberate yet insane. I couldn't look at it for long. Another susurration, a cloud of whispers that turned into chanting. The firelight suddenly flared, reflecting off a massive figure at the back, a golden bull's head, horns tangled with strands of gemstones, standing before an altar. A pillar stood in front of it, topped with a bright torch. A woman approached from the opposite direction, shunting a small body ahead of her. A child, staggering sleepily through the chanting ranks. The bull moved forward. The body was a woman's, naked except for the headdress and the filmy strands of red cloth drifting from her hips. The child continued his trek, wordless and calm. I saw tears on his face and thought of Michael, but not for long. The child stopped at the altar. The bull inclined her head, a mockery of a bow, then removed the headdress and set it reverently on the pillar. The torch filled the bull's mouth and eyes with flames, imbuing the thing with a hideous parody of life. The woman bowed for real this time, then turned and exposed her face. It was me. There's no point in describing what came next. I clapped my hands over my mouth, stifling screams. I felt hands on my shoulder.
Don't look.
Christine whispered. She stroked my hair. Her fingers were clean and whole, unmarred by burns or blisters.
It isn't you.
It may not be me, but it is a part of me. I created it. Michael told me as much. I simply excised the rot in my heart and locked it away in a box. It's separate from what I like to think of as me. But it's still me. By the time the video cut to black, I was prostrate on the floor. I lay there for what felt like a long time, aching and trying to make a plan. Finally, Michael came back. When he removed the disc from the player, I stood up unsteadily. "Can I see it?" I asked.
Why?
I don't know." My voice broke. He gave me an unreadable look, then held it out. When my fingers touched it, I shuddered. Michael turned away, pretending to study the wall. I retreated slowly, trying to mime purposelessness by winding a meandering path toward the door. Then I opened it and bolted out into the night. Crickets sang, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. It was cooler than I expected, verging on uncomfortable. But it felt profoundly pure, in the way only crisp, cool air can. I decided to take the video to the police. Who cared if I went to prison? I needed to. Hell, I needed to die. And before that happened, I would make all of this stop forever. I'd barely made it to the road when I juddered to a full, involuntary halt. Michael approached, gravel grinding under his feet, until he was literally breathing down my neck. I closed my eyes, expecting and hoping for the worst. But he only snatched the disc from my hand. Then he turned and went back into the house, slamming the door behind him. I sat down and wept for hours, long after the moon had risen and my tears turned the ground to mud. Then I stood up, wincing as my bones creaked and sore muscles flexed, and went into my husband's house. I'm not done, but I have to make Michael think I am. I did it before. I think that's why they killed me in the first place, and I'll do it again. I'm going to save Thomas, too. and I'm going to find him and take him to the sea. And I guess we'll go from there. Hello everyone. We are finally finished with this super long series, this tie-in to the Phantom Social Worker series. Or, I guess, the Social Worker series is more of a tie-in to this, considering this series actually came out first. So it's not exactly a prequel, although as far as my channel is concerned, it is a prequel since I did the Phantom Social Worker series first. I want to come in here and explain the ending. If you're not sure what just happened, I can shed some light on it for you because I have a pretty good understanding of how this just ended, and I can confidently say that if you have listened to the full Phantom Social Worker series and this series, you should have all the answers you basically are looking for. If not, if you just listen to this and you haven't heard the Phantom Social Worker one, I would suggest going to listen to that immediately after finishing this, and just keeping in mind that this is definitely something that happened quite a few years before the Phantom Social Worker series, and see what you can come up with yourself, or you can just listen to me spouting off what I have gathered here in this little blurb that I'm putting at the end. My book club of sorts, I believe. This is basically becoming a book club when I come here at the end and explain things or add to it. So if you are subscribed to me and you come back to listen to my videos, consider yourself part of this nice little book club we have. On a more serious note, I'd like to very quickly address the content warning in the title. If you're here at the end of the video listening to this aside, and you did skip the part that I put in the description that is the content warning timestamps, you didn't miss very integral parts of the story. If you listen to this aside in the summary, you'll get all the other missing parts that you need, so don't worry about that. I just put that in the beginning because I was worried that if there's anyone particularly sensitive to child abuse, not just the kind where a children's getting beaten, because there are other parts of this series where children have beaten each other and, all kinds of stuff like that, but, other kinds of child abuse, which I'm not going to go in depth about. You should be able to gather that on your own, since obviously it's different from the kind that was in the story before. The other part that I'd like to speak about, which I don't think is a big deal, but might be to some people depending on how you look at it, is that the story does talk about the characters possibly having dissociative identity disorder. I don't think that's a big deal in this story, particularly because the story isn't centered around it. It's not using it as a crutch, and it sounds more to me like it's a supernatural type of identity disorder. Not that these children have the actual real-life disorder, which is a real thing, if you don't know, by chance. It's more so that they have different actual beings living inside of them. So I hope that no one gets particularly upset about that being in the story, but if you are, and you have an argument as to otherwise, please let me know. Because obviously, I don't have the disorder, so I can't speak for people that do. If you stumble across this series and you do have it, I would be very interested to hear what you think. Please let me know. So I want to start here with saying what happened at the end. To do that, let me first make sure that it's abundantly clear the characters we have here. So if you listen to the Phantom Social Worker series, Rachel, the main character of this series, is the crazy lady from the very last part of the Social Worker series that did the main character's makeup and then took her to that weird cult sacrifice that was happening, and she put on the bull costume and then sacrificed a child on the altar in front of all those people. That's who Rachel is. Already red flags going up because she was wearing that bull costume, and here in this series she's haunted by that bull character, but we'll get to that in a minute. Michael, obviously, Michael Alder, the bad guy. Well, actually kind of all these people are bad guys from the Phantom Social Worker series, but Michael, being one of the big bads from the Phantom Social Worker series, is Rachel's husband, we've come to learn. They didn't seem so lovey-dovey in the Phantom Social Worker series, and now it's obvious why. They obviously have a bit of a falling out here, and it seems like they don't come to grips with whatever happened. You know, they stay fallen out. Richard is the main character from the Social Worker series' brother. Because if you'll remember, Richard is the name that he was given after he was taken as a child. And it's become pretty clear that when he was taken as a child, pretty much the same thing happened to him as happened to Rachel. So we're kind of getting a central theme here that the cult or organization that Rachel is a part of, that she doesn't really remember, takes children that have certain abilities or things they seem to be able to see or do, and they're put in an arena to fight to the death, and then the ones that win are made into like these weird agents or parts of the cult. And then the other ones are cannibalized and eaten. Finally, you know, the other main character, Christine, she, as far as I know, doesn't recur in the Phantom Social Worker series, but she's kind of more or less a ghost that haunts Rachel, kind of like a psychosis type of thing going on, but I'm not quite sure because Michael says he sees them too. He acknowledges that they're physical beings, but she also seems to kind of haunt Rachel around. But it's also made kind of abundantly clear that a lot of that could have been Michael just screwing around with Rachel's head for some reason. So now that I've addressed the characters, in case you didn't make any of those connections, the ending. This ending basically is Rachel saying that she's going to do everything she can to take all this evidence to the police because she's lost her memory and she sees that she was, you know, sacrificing children and was like a horrible part of the cult. But obviously, that never happens because in the Phantom Social Worker series, we see that she's in like that giant mansion that the main character is brought to, and she is still being forced to do work on behalf of the cult. And she's sacrificing children. So that the series ends, and then when it's picked back up in the Phantom Social Worker series, at the very end of that series, it's extremely sad because Rachel does not have a happy ending. Her ending is that she has to keep working for these horrible people. There is so much to this story. I mean, the ending is a little more complex than that, but that's bare bones what the story ends as. And there's so much that happens. Far too much for me to cover. The story was very long, but I will do a tiny synopsis at the end and go over a couple of the main points I have written down. But I also want to talk about a couple of things that aren't related to the storyline, just because the series was so long. And if you're interested in hearing about things like this, then I'm just going to talk about it a little bit. I also want to address some things I saw in the comments that I really agreed with or disagreed with, of the other parts, and kind of talk about what it was like to narrate this series. First of all, it was extremely long. It was a lot of work, but I still did really like this series. Some of the things I did like, the concept is pretty cool, like cults and things like that I find really interesting. And one of the main things I like about the story, even though this can be seen as a good or bad thing, is that we never really know more at any given moment than the main character does. We aren't given any background or anything that the main character doesn't herself know, and she's lost her memory, so she's not even, a good source. So you can look at that in a good or a bad way. In a way, it's, good because we kind of get to experience the story as she does, but it's also bad. And a lot of people in the comments, we're talking about that, and I definitely see how that can be bad. Because we don't know what the heck's going on half the time, but neither does she, so that could be good or bad. It kind of depends on what kind of story you like. So I like the concept. The characters were pretty good. I really like Michael Alder. I think he's a good bad guy in the Phantom Social Worker series, and I think he is a good character in this series because I really ended up feeling for him. Thomas, he is tragic. I felt really sad for him. He obviously tried to do what the same thing Rachel tried to do, but instead ended up going insane. And even though he tried to get away, he didn't, and now he has to work as a prostitute, and he's not happy. Thomas also, this is a small detail if you'll remember, is brought up in the end of the Social Worker series, when Rachel's in that room crying and She says, "Where's Thomas?" And Michael says, "On the beach where you left him." So that brings me to think Rachel at some point probably did end up being able to take Thomas to that weird other world and take him to the beach for whatever reason, and he got left there. So Thomas didn't get a happy end either. And finally, Richard. The Richard in this story for me felt super disconnected from the Richard in the Phantom Social Worker series, you know, because he's the little brother of the main character from that series, but that's okay, because this is a prequel to that one, so it's okay they don't really connect, obviously, because he didn't really awaken to his memories until that series anyway. Some of the things I didn't like, the series was long as heck, super slow burn getting to where we are at now. I think that like 2 parts of the series could have been taken out, because this series is 7 parts long, and I just put several parts together to kind of make it go on a little faster, because I didn't want to have 7 parts of this up on my channel, because it's already quite long. The only other thing I can really say I generally didn't like about this series is that there wasn't a ton of sound design for me to do in like the first 3 parts, which I mean, it's good that there wasn't more work, I guess, but it was also just kind of boring, because a lot of it is just like standing around talking, standing around trying to figure out why I don't have my memory. But, I don't know, that just kind of happens with stories sometimes. So now, I'm going to say a small synopsis of the story. I've made a couple of notes, and I'm just going to really briefly overview what happened in the whole story, not just this last part. So if you're interested in that, stick around, and maybe I can kind of connect some lines for you if you haven't connected them yourself already. So at the beginning of this story, Rachel wakes up in a weird brainwashing facility with no memory. Christine, the dead woman in the closet, approaches her out of the woods, and this also was never addressed, by the way. It's never addressed how she got there, why she's there, whether or not she was a figment of her imagination, or if Michael was screwing with her, but that's alright, I guess. Richard is also there with no memory, which isn't explained, but I believe that's probably because whatever Rachel did to get her memory wiped, Richard either helped or did as well. So I think they're both there because they did something bad and the higher-ups didn't like that. Because it is mentioned that Richard is on another chance, so he's obviously done something bad in the past. We figure out Michael Alders, Rachel's husband. He comes and snatches her up and takes her home. And then we start to learn more about Rachel's past. Growing up as a child, she was victim to a cult that takes children, makes them fight to the death, eats the ones that don't win, and takes the one that do win and do something with them that we aren't exactly sure what. We can probably assume that Rachel, Richard, and Michael all had to go through the same process, and they get otherworldly abilities from it, or they have them already, and because they win, they are nurtured by the cult instead of killed. Rachel seems to have the ability to go to this other world and heal people. Michael seems to have the ability to somewhat live forever, because it's said several times that he doesn't look nearly his age, and he's like over 70 years old, according to some of pictures from like 1912. Richard we're unsure of. In the Social Worker series, it's made to look that he's kind of a leader. He's like head of the cult experience we see at the end of the Social Worker series, so I'm not sure what his position is. I'm not sure if we'll ever get an answer to that. We never do find out exactly who Rachel is. It's just said she was plucked up out of like an orphanage or ran away from home or something and was put into this cult. We then see at some point this weird other world that Rachel's put into, which seems more like a fever dream, but it's shown later that that is like a physical plane, perhaps another dimension or something like that, but it is a physical world. Michael has killed her in the past, and she has been shown to be able to be brought back to life by being brought to this world and put in the ocean there. And it's also shown at the very end of the story that Michael is brainwashing Rachel, because another one of his powers is that he can make her think or do whatever he wants, basically, if he tries hard enough. And so all of the weirdness throughout the story, where we're wondering, why is this girl going along with this? Why doesn't she think this is weird? Why is this happening and she's doing nothing? Was all because of Michael. That is an extreme simplification of this story. It's kind of the best I can do without making a video all for just talking about this story. But, I mean, I like the story. I think that it was pretty good. I don't know if we'll ever get more information than we've been given already. This story itself is pretty old. It was the very first series that Dopabeane, or R.C. Bowman is her other writing name. It's the first story she ever put out on nosleep. So I'm not sure if we're gonna get a follow-up to this, but if you listen to both series, you can get a pretty good idea of what's going on, and it's just basically cults and people being bad people. I thought the story was pretty good. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you like this little aside thing that I do at the end of some of these longer stories, or stories that I think need a little more explaining. I like doing it, especially for stories like this where a ton of the stuff is ambiguous. But other than that, I hope that you enjoyed the series.